I want to take a moment to talk about how we're going to run today's program. It is a careers panel, so we're really here to try to answer as many questions of yours as possible. I'm going to briefly introduce our panel, just tell you who they are and where they currently work, and maybe a little bit of background on their education and some other jobs that they had. And then I'm going to invite our panelists to tell you a little bit more about themselves, a little bit more about their story, how they got to where they are. I have a few questions I'd like to pose, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. If you do have a question, please make sure that we can get to you with a microphone. We do need to have one, at least to capture it for our online audience. And for those of you who are online, you can submit questions through GoToWebinar's question box. I've got a laptop right here, and I'll be able to take a look at your questions, and we'll get to those as we go as well. But we will wait until we get through the initial round of questions to open it to the floor. I'd like to apologize for a change to the lineup today. The congressional staffer who was confirmed got pulled away. As you can imagine, that job schedule changes a lot, and with the events yesterday that affected Congress, she wasn't able to make it, so I apologize for her and on behalf of her. So again, I'd like to dive in and introduce your panel. I'll be answering questions too as an environmental attorney and an employee here at ELI, so I can give you as much perspective as I can as well. But before we do that, I'd like to get a show of hands from those in the room. How many of you are current students, any type of student? Okay, current undergrads, current law students, current other advanced degrees. Great. And how many of you are currently environmental attorneys? Licensed attorneys. Great. Makes it easy. No. Thanks everyone for being here. We do have a great online audience as well, so I really do want to encourage their participation. Okay, like I said, I'm going to briefly introduce the panel and then allow them to kind of tell you a little bit about themselves. To my immediate right is Claire Browne. Claire is an associate at the law firm of Perkins Coie here in DC. At Perkins, Claire specializes in representing manufacturing and industrial Fortune 500 clients in EHS, environmental health and safety compliance, under U.S. and Canadian law. Claire also does a lot of regulatory work in the EHS front, and she can tell you more about what all this means in a moment. She also has some experience with private environmental governance, from what I can tell, helping craft audits for companies. While in law school, Claire worked for US EPA in a couple capacities, and before law school, she also worked for EPA, the Office of Air and Radiation, as a special assistant to the science advisor. Claire is licensed to practice law in the District of Columbia and Maryland. She has her JD from George Washington University Law School, where she was the managing editor of the George Washington Journal of Energy and Environmental Law. Her undergraduate degree is a BS in Environmental Geoscience from Texas A&M. Next, we'll hear from Neal Kemkar. Neal is the Director of Environmental Policy at the General Electric Company. Neal has held a wide range of positions in the government, including roles with the White House Council on Environmental Quality, the Department of Interior, and with the state of Colorado. Prior to entering public service, Neal practiced law in New York and Washington and taught environmental law at Maryland Law School. He is a graduate of Browne University, Georgetown Law, and also has an advanced degree from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. I'd love to hear more about that. And finally, joining us remotely from San Francisco, we have Dr. Jan Mazurek. Jan directs ClimateWorks Foundation's Clean Power campaign. Jan has worked on energy and climate policy at the federal and state level for over 20 years. She most recently has worked around California's power sector with AB 32. Prior to that, she served as a senior policy advisor for the California Air Resource Board, or CARB, and as a member of the Obama-Biden presidential transition focused on EPA. Jan has a BA and an MA and also a doctorate, and I believe they're all from UCLA. Jan, please correct me if I'm wrong there. But why don't we go ahead and start with Jan, if you're ready. Could you come in and introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, and we're going to get your video up on the screen as well.
Okay, that's scary. Thank you, Brett. Thanks, fellow panelists, and thanks to those of you who sacrificed your lunch hour and those of you who joined online. And I was hoping to be the slacker. Hi, everyone. I was hoping to be the slacker here and go last so that I could crib from what my other esteemed panelists are doing. And I know it's always a little challenging to follow somebody who's appearing as a version of an avatar or hologram, but I'll do my best here. So as Brett alluded to, I'm somewhat the outlier in terms of background and qualifications, insofar as I didn't take the traditional sort of East Coast school and land in DC approach. Not that I didn't have the opportunity, but I wisely or unwisely took down a Harvard fellowship to take a very, very different path. And so I think the point of what I want to say is that given that I'm very, very fortunate to find myself here in this perch of California philanthropy, one doesn't always have to sort of take the standard approach to a career in this field. And I think owing to the greater complexities and challenges that we find ourselves in today's environmental and energy policy milieu, it can help to move through a variety of positions and take an unconventional approach. So should I stop there or should I continue?
No, and sorry to switch up the order on you. I realized that I would have gone back to myself to talk first, and that felt kind of weird. So, but Jana, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what ClimateWorks Foundation does. I wanted to mention that, and I failed to. So
no, that's quite all right. So ClimateWorks, we are both a philanthropy, but we also work to catalyze philanthropic giving among a set of about 14 major other endowed foundations, and I'd be happy to name some of those if that's of interest. But we also work with newer entrants in the field, so family foundations, as well as partners, many of whom are based in DC, who have sort of a philanthropic arm, but also kind of our think and do tanks in-house. And we work traditionally in the major emitting regions, so China, India, the United States, and EU, but increasingly we're looking at places such as Southeast Asia, where about 450 new coal plants are slated to go in. And so although it may sound like a deterministic approach, targeting the largest emitting regions with strategies to move policy, and we also build in a lot of qualitative work and have a political economy filter as well, paying very, very close attention to the impacts of a transition away from fossil intensive production to a cleaner economy that's not without friction and pain.
Great. Did we lose you, or? Oh.
Were you able to hear me?
We might have lost the very end of it. Oh, there. Great. We have you on the screen now.
Did you lose the audio?
Yeah, just briefly at the very end.
Well, yeah, sorry. There's it's morning here in San Francisco, and ironically or not ironically, perhaps there's always a bandwidth challenge. So I apologize. Where did I? I was just saying that we're very, very. We focus on the largest emitting regions, but we're also very mindful of trying not to take a deterministic approach and be very sensitive to the impacts of transition away from fossil fuel intensive economy on those individuals who work in those sectors.
Great, thanks so much. I want to come back to a couple things that you mentioned, but I'll do that after we hear from the rest of our panel. Thanks, Jan. Neal, how about you?
Sure. Thanks, Brett. Thanks to Scott Fulton for the invitation, and thanks to all of you for spending some time with us. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I guess I'd start by just saying get excited. I mean, this is a fantastic field you all have chosen, are choosing, hopefully stay with. It's tricky to build a career in environmental law, policy, politics, in the broader field to try to stay engaged. But, the community that you'll build here this summer, staying engaged with ELI, and, coming to events like this and continuing to explore new things is part of it. And it takes a lot of work to kind of get where you're going. But I promise you it is a really fulfilling career. We can talk about it more over the hour here. But it's one where there's a great camaraderie, I think, between and amongst environmental law, policy, politics practitioners of all levels. You're probably already seeing that now. It's evidenced by the fact that we're here or remotely, virtually here with you today, and the conversations you're having with each other, and I'm sure with mentors of yet another generation. So I would just say, if it's a big field, there's a lot of people in it, but it's still intimate. It's not the same as general litigation or one of these broad fields where you can get lost. I mean, this is really an area where if you really show a passion for the subject and an interest and some aptitude for it, there's every reason to believe you can make a great career out of it, and that other folks will help you along on your way. I personally be happy to have conversations with folks. I'm sure Claire and Jan and Brett would as well, just to kind of share either our story or the accumulated wisdom that we've figured out from our mistakes, of which there are many along the way. But it's a fantastic field. So that's what I'd start with and say, get excited and power through it. There are some tough moments. Maybe your first gig, like mine, will be in general litigation at a big law firm as you finish up law school. And maybe you'll get into the energy or environment sections, and maybe you won't. Maybe you'll be doing white collar. Maybe you'll be marking documents as non-responsive. That's okay. It's all part of the growth process. It's all part of getting to where you're going. And, that's kind of my other message is, for me now, as you heard a little bit from Brett, I've worked in government at state and federal levels. I've worked at big law firms. I've worked at boutique environmental law firms, and now I'm in-house. Before I was a lawyer, I did nonprofit advocacy for NGOs, and I'm currently on the board of a nonprofit, the National Park Trust, where we work to preserve parkland and bring young people out into it. So there's a lot, I've already experienced a lot of different approaches to this field, and I think you will as well. And I just encourage you to do that. Whatever schema you have of yourself, of what your career is going to look like, I promise you that when you look back, it's going to look a little bit different. There's opportunities now. I worked for President Obama, and when I was sitting in your seats, the idea, I didn't know his name, none of us did, and B, the idea that he could be a president or the president was well out of the realm of possibility. And likewise, you probably wouldn't have envisioned the current administration. So there are twists and turns that are external to your career that will direct it, and just embrace that and continue to remake yourself. There's resilience that you build with every turn in your career, every new approach, perspective that you take, whether you know it or not, will add to the way you think about this field and add to the richness and diversity of your experience. And probably the last thing I'll say is there's never been a more interesting time to get into this field. There's all levels, whether you're talking about the global aspects of this, national in this country, or state or local levels. There is never a dull day. And, depending on your personal view of where things are going, you may think that's fantastic or terrible, but certainly it's job security for all of you. It's a way that every day will be slightly different. Every day you'll be reacting to current events for your clients or for your companies or your groups. But certainly you'll be engaged in one of the most exciting fields at one of the most exciting times, I think. And I'm happy to talk more about my experience and some other things as we get into it. But I wanted to sort of start with those messages.
Thanks, Neal. That's great. Claire, how about some opening thoughts from you?
Hi, guys. My name's Claire Browne, and unlike Neal and Jen, who have a lot of experience to fall back on, I graduated from law school 3 years ago. And while I was in college, I attended this event. So I guess that was 5 years ago now. So welcome and good luck. And it's nice to be on this side. And I hope you guys all find that too someday. So I graduated 3 years ago, and my first gig was doing contract work for an independent environmental consultant right out of law school, hoping and praying I would get a job someday, one that, like had benefits. And I did, and it was in an environmental field. I came to law school, I have an undergrad in environmental science, and I came to law school knowing I wanted to do environmental law. That stayed true the whole way through. I liked it, so that was a good thing to find out. But when I graduated, jobs were tough to find. My understanding is that it's getting easier and easier. I think that probably depends on your perspective and who you are and a whole lot of factors, but I don't know. And that was really challenging. A lot of my friends sat at that spot too, where we graduated with a huge amount of debt, big dreams, big hopes, and nothing. But the good news is we're 3 years out now, and we're all settled. We all found good jobs. We're all happy. People in the environmental field who wanted to be there are all in it. People who didn't know that they wanted to be in the environmental field but fell into it, I knew that people like that too. And that's been really rewarding to see that though it can feel challenging, well, at all points in law school and right after, that we were doing something, and you don't realize it now, but you're putting yourself on a path, and it's little things that add up. I know when I was in school, everyone talked about networking, and you have to be networking, and it's all about networking. Get out there and network. And that just overwhelmed me. And I didn't realize that even though I wasn't, they're like, oh, make sure you talk to 5 people a week and do all this. I wasn't doing that, but I was planting little seeds that then came back later throughout, where I had a professor I really liked, and later on she forwarded me a job post, those kinds of things that you don't even really think about, or an internship supervisor that you're like, everyone says, email everyone all the time. That seems like a lot to me. I mailed them maybe twice a year, but they followed up and they cared and they were great references and those kind of things where you don't know, even if they're saying you have to network so you can ensure yourself to get a job, there's a lot of little things you're doing by just showing up every day and doing your best and caring that add up in the end. And that was great to see, and I'm sure if you do more, maybe there's more out there, but what you do will help you in the future now. So good luck and welcome to the panel.
Thanks, Claire. So I'm going to step into a little bit beyond a moderator role since we're down to panelists today and share a little bit about my experience. As I said earlier, I'm the director of associates here, which means that I work a lot on our membership side and with our programming. I'm also a staff attorney, licensed attorney, and I get to work on some great research projects here at ELI. Those include a sustainable forestry project in Liberia, where we're helping the Liberian government to implement sustainable forestry practices in the kind of follow-up to their civil wars in the late 1990s and early aughts, and incorporating sustainability requirements and agreements they have with the European Union. Other research projects I'm on include a brownfields revitalization program, where we're looking at ways to help overburdened communities catalyze redevelopment in their neighborhoods in green and sustainable ways. I get to meet all kinds of wonderful professionals and some of the best minds in the environmental law and policy field through my job. That's one of my favorite things about my gig, and work with great panelists like those that we have involved today. Like Claire, I'm newer to the profession than Neal and Jan. I graduated in 2014, which is the same year Claire did, so again, 3 years out. I took a job here at the Environmental Law Institute in October of that year, and made the move from New Orleans, where I was at law school, to DC. So I definitely have the experience of being kind of new to the Beltway and new to the way that law and policy works here. So I'm happy to speak to that experience. Although all of you have a leg up on me, you've been here before you accepted a job in DC, which I hadn't, except for my high school field trip. So that's pretty much my background, and this was all by design. We wanted some folks with some more experience, some people that were kind of closer to maybe what the experience is coming out of law school or graduate school right now. But I also wanted to shout out to those of you in the audience who are thinking about law school. I find I get way more questions from people contemplating, should I go to law school to do environmental law and or policy work, than I get on people who are there, they know what they want to do, So I hear you. I hear you seeking advice, and I want to address any questions you have on that topic as best as we can. I think it's a little bit harder to give advice on like, yes, you should or shouldn't go, and I wouldn't say that to anyone, for sure this is what you should do, but just wanted to get some of those thoughts out. So great. Again, before we get to your questions, which I'm sure you have, and again, if you're on the webinar, please send questions as you think of them. We'll get to them when it's time, but please get your thoughts out so we have them. I want to turn to the panel and ask just a couple basic questions to learn more about your work. And Jan, we'll come back to you first if you're there. Can you hear me?
I'm here.
Good.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good. So Jan, I think I want to follow up on some of what you talked about in your initial remarks. What would you tell to students or young professionals who are considering the geographic aspect of their career and how that weighs into the decision making? I know it can be hard to turn down a job because it's in a place that you don't necessarily want to live, or to focus a job hunt in the place where you really want to be when you feel like opportunities are limited. And you mentioned, getting to be in California. Can you talk a little bit about your experience? And it seems like you've been in multiple places, but a little bit more about, how you ended up where you want to be and how that kind of played out in your career.
Thank you for asking that question. And so I confess to having bi-coastal disorder insofar as I'm not originally from California, but I'm very, very selfishly wedded to my home state. But early in my career, I had the opportunity to go to DC and take a job. It was supposed to be a 6-month assignment. And of course, I caught Potomac Valley fever, which was very, very easy to catch. And yes, I took a high school trip to DC as well. And so it was always in the back of my mind. And I very, very quickly forgot about California and figured at some point in my life I could sort of take all of my experiences gleaned from serving in Washington and apply them here in my home state. And I was very, very fortunate that actually worked out that way. If presented with an opportunity, it can be very, emotionally challenging to pick up and move to a new city. But I think in this space, as both Neal and Claire and Brett to some degree have also alluded to, it's super easy to form a community, and so I wouldn't, I would not let a big move discourage you. And I think today, given at least in the energy and climate space, that so many of the challenges we see are going to be coming from other geographies. Being able to travel the world and live and gain experience in other geographies is absolutely key. In this job, I fly 100,000 miles a year because, increasingly the challenges that we see, not to say that San Francisco isn't without environmental challenges and other challenges, certainly we have lots of those, but having to wear a mask at night in Beijing is a complete eye-opener for those of you who haven't experienced those challenges yet.
Thanks, Jan. How about the rest of the panel on that same question? Do you have any thoughts on geography and making decisions based on where you're at?
Yeah, sure. I like Jan, I lived in a fair number of places. Right after law school, I clerked out in Seattle on the Ninth Circuit, and I had no real connection to Seattle. And I've worked for the governor of Colorado in Denver, lived in Beijing. I think for you, the broader sort of theme might be, what can you only do now? What kind of flexibility do you have? It's a really personal question for all of us, right? Like, you don't even have to answer this to anyone but yourself, but what kind of, in terms of my life partnership, in terms of money, in terms of personal flexibility, resiliency, can I do this? And I think if you answer honestly to yourself, yeah, actually maybe I don't want to, maybe it'd be a little bit harder to leave the place where I currently call home, but I really could, and I could do it now. then ask yourself, well, okay, if I can, well, what's stopping me? Why? What is it about, you know, is it comfort? Is it that it would be too expensive to move, too hard? You don't, you know, there's just some external reason, and there could very well be external reasons. But if you can, I, for one, suggest doing it. You're getting as many experiences as you can. You know, I would frankly think of the first 10 years after grad school as accumulating experiences, and whether that's living in different places, taking different job types, those are opportunities that you probably won't get to do, you know, for personal or other reasons later in your life, for the most part. So this is a great opportunity to be accumulating different experiences. And so if you answer those series of questions kind of honestly to yourself, then I think you should. There's a lot to be gained by seeing, well, you know, maybe there are things that you think of as just the way things are done. But maybe you move and you get a different lens, a different perspective, and you realize, well, that's just the way things are done in DC. In Denver, people approach things totally differently. They have a different work week. I'm sure in the Bay Area they have yet a different approach. And you know, in Seattle, for example, in a handful of sunny days in the summer, no one can be found at their desk. And meanwhile here, I think everyone wants to be indoors during the summer. And so, you know, there are just different things about different parts of the country and the world. And the beauty of your profession is that it's portable, and the profession that you're getting into. And so accumulate as many experiences as you can. And I think you'll be thankful as you get into your second, third decades out of grad school. You'll be thankful to be able to draw on those different experiences that you were able to accumulate in the early years.
Claire, did you have to make any tough choices about where you were going to be located?
Well, I very actively chose to stay in DC. I think Neal and Jan made good points, but for me, the right decision was to stay here. I'm from Texas. I knew I wanted to do environmental law, specifically Clean Air Act law, and I knew if I went back to Houston, where I'm from, there might be a lot of opportunities there. You know, if you're doing compliance work, a lot of people work with lawyers where they're at, and Houston has a lot of people who have a lot of Clean Air Act issues that they need help with. And I decided I didn't want to go back. I wanted to stay in DC. You know, for better, for worse, it turned out okay, so I'm glad about that. But that was the right decision for me at that time. It always was in the back of my head. I was looking at jobs in Houston and applying to a few. But I decided not to go back unless it was like a dream job scenario. And I'm glad I stayed here. I feel like maybe it was harder. DC can be a competitive town to get a job at, and especially to get different experiences like Jan and Neal are talking about. But if you just keep going, you can make it work. I have other friends who went back to their home areas, and especially the law firm market can be easier in smaller areas when you can be a big fish in a small pond instead of a small pond and a small fish in a big pond, or you know how that goes. And they made that decision, and some of them are happy about it. Some of them are deciding, you know what, I did want to be in a bigger market. I'm going to come back, and are looking to leave their home market and come back to more of a national market. So it's a very personal decision, and people are answering it in all sorts of ways that continually everyone's looking at this over and over again. And especially when you throw, you know, partners into the mix and how those add into the equation, it gets complicated. And I don't think you just have to find what's right for you. I think it can be easier in a small market to stand out, and especially one where you have connections through your undergrad or family, you know, whatever it is, those can make it easier. But in DC, this is a melting pot. So you'll also find people with those connections here who, you know, you didn't know it, but they're exactly that. And now I have clients in Houston, but I'm working for them here. So that I was like, oh, I could get, you know, an easier job there, but I'm working for the same people I might have been working for if I went back home now. I think that's because I was able to talk about those experiences and having that connection to Houston and seeing the oil industry, especially at, during Deepwater Horizon. I think to talk about that in interview really resonated with people who do that kind of work. And that's the job I'm at now. And it's in DC, but it's not in Houston. So, you know, I'm glad I stayed, but I can see a lot of benefits of going elsewhere, and I do see how the opportunities are different elsewhere.
Thanks. Sorry, a little bit of a tangent, but Jan raised the issue, and I thought it was a good one. A couple other questions, I guess. This one for Neal. You worked in general litigation in the beginning of your career. What about environmental law and policy makes it different from a general legal practice? What's specifically, unique about that field?
That's a good question. So I think, first of all, general litigation is so broad and has so many different facets that for the community aspect we've been talking about, it certainly can exist amongst a set of really hardcore litigators, but amongst folks that are just kind of in the game, in the space, I don't sense that same sort of community that there is in the environmental law space. And just in terms of the work, one of the things that's great about environmental law is that it's really broad, but ultimately finite, right? It's an area where you can be expert in process and substance. In litigation, general lit, you could be working on, a white collar matter that has to do with a major healthcare company. One day you could be working on Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Another day it's a really broad set of issues that I don't sense necessarily as funneling down as much into subject matter mastery. But just to answer sort of the flip side of that, I am a big fan of spending your first couple of years, especially broadening your base of experience rather than narrowing. So if you clerk, you may be working on civil, non-environmental civil matters, criminal matters, immigration matters. If you spend time at a big law firm, you certainly could be working on non-environmental litigation matters. And you may not, frankly, get the dream gig as your first one. So I'm a big fan of broadening the base while you can, and getting as many different experiences as you can while you can, particularly in school. I spent time with the district court, with U.S. attorneys while I was in law school. And I think, if you think, well, I just have to do ELI or EPA or DOE or, these certain things, those are great. They can take you where you want to go. But this is also your opportunity to do general lit and get a frame of reference so that you can answer that question on a panel one day and just and then remember that you chose this, right? That's the last thing I'll say is like you just remember, if you come back and you choose this over and over, it makes all those things I was talking about earlier, the kind of difficulty of finding your groove, getting that job that you like and you think you'll stay in for a while. It makes that all worthwhile. It makes the challenge worthwhile because you can remember, you have the reference case in your mind. I don't want to be doing general lit or whatever it is that you try. I don't want to be doing immigration or civil cases or whatever it is. You have the frame of reference to say, I tried that. I have that in my rearview mirror. I know what that experience is like for me. And every time I come back to this space, and I'm going to actively choose it because, the era of picking, for all of us, the era of picking one company, staying there and leaving with a pension plan or one NGO or even, staying in one government job, that era is squarely behind us. Your career is going to be portable, as you're probably already experiencing. And so having that kind of courage and the broad base at the beginning, it's really helpful, I think.
Thanks. I'm going to look to Jan first, and then maybe Neal on this next one again. Those of you who've had a little bit longer career, Jan, how do you gauge your own success in your career and that of your organization? How do you, after a handful of years, or how do you measure how your career has gone and how the work that you're doing, how impactful it is personally, I guess, or maybe how ClimateWorks wants to measure it too?
That's a really tough question. So thanks for that. So I've been working. So I should note that I started my career actually working on the Toxic Substances Control Act of 1976 and trying to reform that. And just to pick up on a point that Neal made, I was able to do that work because UCLA at the time had offered a really important interdisciplinary program where I had to study public health policy and engineering. And so for all of you who are contemplating careers in this space, you will find that you at some point have to get your chops at least up on some of the other topics outside of your field. So, but in terms of measuring success, I measure success in terms of the fact that Lisa Jackson and I actually managed to, working with Congress, get TSCA reauthorized, which was one of the only pieces of environmental legislation that actually made it through Congress and President Obama's desk for signature. So I think that was a big win. And I think it's also important to note that if you're the type of person who really thrives on individual successes, maybe look for another career, because in the environmental and energy space, it's all collaborative. I mean, there isn't one single person who will ever be able to take credit for, a bill or even more importantly, actually seeing ambient emissions in the environment go down. So there's definitely a win on TSCA. And it took 35 years. So one has to be super, super patient in the space. On climate, my work from TSCA took me into the voluntary environmental space, which very, very quickly led to work on climate. And there we've had to be much more patient. And one has to sort of look for wins and professional success, I think, in a different way. So here at ClimateWorks, for those of you who are interested, we just published a blog on Faster, Cleaner 2. We are seeing now that wind and solar are coming online at a pace that none of the forecasting models could have ever predicted. And that's a huge win for everyone who works in this space. But of course, particularly for those of you sitting inside the Beltway right now, it may feel like a very frustrating time. And to that, I would just say, look at all of the businesses and cities and regional efforts around the world to continue to stay in the fight and deeply engaged in the subject matter. So, one has to sort of gauge success in that way. And I'll say that sometimes it will feel as though you're maybe just wasting a lot of paper, which I've certainly felt over the course of my career. But at the same time, patience and willingness to sort of get in there and dig in for the long haul, I think, are really super important.
Thanks. So Neal, same question. How do you measure success personally and in your role at GE or in any of the roles that you've had in your career?
Sure. Well, I think Jan hit a lot of the great high points. Let me borrow from Simon Sinek and his TED Talk. Has anyone seen that? It comes down to autonomy, mastery, and purpose. For me, those are the three big things that I look for in any role. And I know, and you will too, very clearly when you don't have them. And that will become obvious, and that will probably lead to you sprucing up your resume. But you also know when you do, when you, and I suspect, certainly from hearing Jan, it sounds like she has that in her role in spades. This idea that you're up to something, you have a broad approach and purpose to what you're doing. You have mastery, whether it's over subject or process. And then you have autonomy. You have a little bit of room, or so at least a little bit of room to run within your role, and you're not kind of doing the same thing over and over with no discretion. Those are the types of roles that I think you'll find, and that's what I think about, and that's certainly how I feel about my current role. I just this week, I've been working on making sure the UN Treaty on Aviation Emissions doesn't go in the same direction that the Paris Agreement went, that the U.S. will kind of stay lined up there, working with the National Association of State Energy Officials on state-level issues, and had a big event for the National Park Trust to help put a spotlight on it, and in my personal time, and to raise money for it. And these are broad brush things, but what I say is if you have the ability to have autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and you're growing, and you're learning in your role, then certainly you may not be able to rack up the substantive wins. You may not be able to keep the U.S. in Paris if that's something that you feel strongly about. You may not be able to save the Clean Power Plan. You certainly should continue to work towards what you care about, but you may not always find yourself in an environment where the wins are coming externally. So you can always come back to autonomy, mastery, and purpose in your role, and that's something you can take with you throughout your career, even if you end up not staying in the environmental law field. Those are good sort of hallmarks to look for.
Thanks. So, Claire, you're an associate at a big law firm. The audience has probably heard stories about what that's like. What do you most enjoy about your job, and then what's the challenge of being an associate in your role?
Well, first off, I never thought I would work for a firm. It was not on my radar. And here I am today working for a firm. So you never know what you might end up liking. I was surprised that it was a good fit for me in the end. What I enjoy about it is in environmental law, there's a lot of jobs where you're not working for anybody. You're working for a mission, and those missions are great, and I believed in them. But in my internships, I found the things I cared most about were when I was working with a client and they said, here's my problem, and I said, I'll get you the answer. So when I graduated from law school, I realized I had to reorient my career search to something that on a personal level I would find fulfilling on a daily basis. I believe in working for missions, but for me, if I'm leaving my work at the end of the day, I'm going to feel best when I gave someone something that helped them. And that was an aspect I didn't consider before, but then I was like, okay, I need to be in a place where I'm working for someone, where I'm helping someone solve a problem. And that's what I most enjoy. People come to me, they say, we have this problem, and I can answer it. Sometimes I can answer it better than others. And most of the time, they're asking you because it's hard, and it's really good to be asked the hard questions. In previous jobs, the work just wasn't hard enough. The answers were too easy. And I think it's at a big firm, people will only come to you with the hardest questions because it's a lot of money. And that's been shocking, that things can be as complicated as they are. There's so many different areas where there just isn't an answer, or in a huge regulatory scheme with so much text, they somehow didn't answer this one question that seems very basic to the person at the facility on the ground saying, I need to set up my machine, well, how do I calibrate it? And you'd think that would be included in a regulation about how to operate this machine, but it's not. And I really enjoy being able to dig into the statutes and regulations and find the answer for them, and then when it's not there, figuring out how we fill that gap, how we create a solution where they can be in compliance with something there is no requirement for. And that's what I enjoy the most. I help people solve their problems on a daily basis. The most challenging things are that it's hard, that oftentimes figuring out that there is no answer is a really hard thing to do. You're just like, I must be missing it. Why wouldn't this be there? And to figure out that that's not your problem, it's the problem with the thing you're working with. And having the confidence to go back and say, sorry, there's no answer, but we're going to figure it out. That's a tough thing to do. In a big firm environment, and as opposed to the general litigation practice, I'm in a very specialized practice, and that's wonderful because I think in the environmental groups at big firms, I have several friends in big firms in environmental practices, and several friends in big firms in general lit, or I don't know what else they're called, commercial lit, those kind of practices. In the environmental groups, everyone's specialized, all the partners are, and they, I think, do a better job of looking out for their associates and saying, what do you want to be? How can we grow and create your specialty? That there's more of a tight-knit community in the environmental groups, and they're looking out for you in a more personal way instead of just being like, we need someone to come read these documents. They're like, oh, she has an interest in this area, let's pull her into this. And there is a wide range of different environmental areas where you can get lots of experience in lots of different areas and practice types. But the struggle of that is it can be a little bit harder to pull together your hours requirements for a big firm. If you're in a big firm in environmental practice, especially if you're not doing litigation, it's hard. People have talked about the difference between a litigation and a regulatory practice and meeting your hours requirement, and I didn't fully appreciate that till I'm now in a regulatory practice trying to meet an hours requirement, and how if you're working on little bits of things, there's so much lost time in between those little bits of things. And if you're in litigation and you're, reviewing docs all day, you're just going. You're, without interruption. But I'm getting to a point, asking a question, waiting for a response, getting back to it, and there's more holes in that area. So
maybe you could, thanks, that's great, but it made me realize maybe you could explain kind of the different kinds of practices briefly, what regulatory practice versus litigation, and Neal, I don't know if you work too much with in-house folks at G, but what that's like. I've realized that's something that I probably didn't realize completely until I was well out of law school, or at some point in law school, that there's regulatory work, there's litigation, there's general.
Sure. So litigation is probably easier to describe. It's what you think of when there's a lawsuit. And there's a lot of environmental litigation. I just don't do it. That's not what my practice is at the moment. And then a regulatory practice, so there's always a lawsuit, whether it be the government suing someone, or a citizen suit, or a dispute that grew out of a business contract. But a regulatory practice is mainly compliance, so helping firms or businesses come into compliance, and also administrative enforcement defense. I'm sure most of you know that most environmental violations don't go to court. They're settled ahead of time, but there's a lot of work that comes with settling an environmental violation. So that's a good amount of what I do in my work, is negotiating those consent decrees for the violations, and then helping the company implement that. Because if you're in a consent decree, there's a lot of compliance steps that you have to do to comply with it.
I guess the other practice area that can be heavily environmental is transactional work.
Mm-hmm.
Folks that are dealing with complex transactions when there's Superfund or brownfield issues, environmental attorneys get involved a lot in the due diligence and putting together those packages too. So if you're thinking transactional, there's also room for that. There's people that specialize in negotiations. There's people that specialize in the due diligence behind those. All of that is another piece of it. And you want to talk about a little bit when you have one client?
Sure. Well, and I would affiliate that's exactly right from my firm experience. And then when you have one client, actually the bigger companies in it kind of mirror the same things, because we're managing outside counsel. So it's a lot of the same sort of divisions internally. So you've got the folks who are, you've got your vice president for litigation, you've got competition law or antitrust. For us, we do a lot of mergers and acquisitions. You've got the global government affairs law, sort of policy angle. You've got the regulatory frameworks. We're a highly regulated company. Most companies are. And it ends up being a mirror of the same. Frankly, it's probably the other way around. The law firms have structured themselves the way their clients are structured, and whichever came first, they're fairly well aligned. So just to take it up a level, whether you do the deal side in-house or at a firm and doing the environmental diligence work on that, whether you do the compliance, the regulatory, the litigation, or whether you just do straight policy, which there are a handful of law and policy firms in town as well who do that and focus their practices exclusively on influencing policy. So there's a lot of different ways to cut it, whether you're in-house at a law firm or at an NGO or in the government. Very similar from my time working in a couple of different government agencies. I just add the same thing. Similar breakup depending on the agency. At Interior, we had a solicitor's office that had quite a few, they were broken up by media, the way they are kind of at EPA, in terms of air, water, that kind of stuff. For us, it was the, Native American issues, various land issues, outer continental shelf issues. So, you've got the sort of procedural breakups, and then you've got the substantive expert breakups as well.
And a good point that is probably mirrored in most federal government agencies and also the NGOs. They often have regulatory people that are focused on, writing comments for clients or responding to, rulemakings. And then there's one specialized in litigation. So it's true. It's kind of mirrored throughout all the different organizations or companies you could be working with. I want to ask one more of my prepared questions, and I'll get feedback from all of you on this, starting with Jan. I mentioned earlier that I know that there's, and I get a lot of questions just in my day-to-day on, you might be an undergraduate who's considering a career in environmental law or policy. What advice do we have for those folks as they're deciding what is the next step in their academic career, including things about, going straight through school? Any thoughts on any of that? I know that's the most popular questions that I get. So why don't we turn to the non-lawyer on the panel and go to Jan for your thoughts there.
Sure, happy to help with that. And then can you just sort of clarify, was the question like what?
For those folks who are considering what's next after, say, undergraduate, they're done with undergrad.
Yeah. I hate to say this, but as somebody who put off, getting an advanced degree for a while, it gets harder and harder the longer you wait. And then, of course, the opportunity cost goes up because salary levels ideally go up in this career as well. So in retrospect, having taken the unconventional path of going for 4 years, working, going back for 2, working, and then getting my PhD. At the same time, I was on the Obama-Biden transition. I'd say it helps to do a lot of internships while you're in school, but try to get the educational portion out of the way, I would say. Anyway, that's my bias. But at the same time, again, I just want to stress the point that when I was even getting my PhD, I spent a lot of time at the law school. I spent a lot of time in the business school. And, I still tried to immerse myself and audit the science classes. So even if you are contemplating a career in law, it does help to enroll in courses elsewhere on campus.
Neal.
I agree with all that. I would just say I would start with the top line, which is do what's right for you. There is absolutely no one answer. My own experience, I applied to law school right out of college and then decided I didn't want to go and worked for a couple of years and then decided I did want to go after all. And my LSAT was expiring, so I better get going on it. So then I went. And so, I had a great experience having had a couple of years of work experience. It did a couple of things for me. One was get me fired up about being back in school, no more suits, like that was exciting. It got me fired up about actually making the most out of the opportunity. And I think particularly as those of you already in law school and grad school are finding, it's kind of a blunt instrument. It magnifies what you brought in with you, and those that, if you go straight through, you have just less that you bring through with you. But on the other hand, it's also a sprint. So if you get through it as quick as you can and you're just on a roll, that's great for you too. There's no wrong answer. Just do what's right. The one thing on this kind of question that I'd like to emphasize is law is not really just a 3-year path. So let's say you're sitting here in DC this summer and you say, my dream job is working at the Environment and Natural Resources Division of Justice. Maybe at least one of you has that as a dream gig. But you may find that you will have a 3-year law school experience, maybe a 1-year clerking experience, and maybe 3 to 5 years at a firm before you get to DOJ. You may find even a longer path. You should know that it's a nonlinear path, as I think we've all sort of shared, and it's also a path that can take longer than the 3 that it's sometimes advertised as to get where you're going. And that's all part of the journey, like we've been talking about. But know, for those of you that are still thinking about the next step, and if law school is one of the things you're thinking of, just know that, before you can get to where you're going, it might be a couple of steps after school, because they definitely teach you how to think like a lawyer in law school, but they don't necessarily teach you how to be a lawyer. That's things that you pick up in the first couple of years with on-the-job training. So that's just something else I'd add.
Claire.
Yeah, I agree with what Neal said, and I went straight through from undergrad, and I really debated whether to take time off or not. I decided not to. I really, in maybe the year after I graduated or so, really blamed the fact that I didn't take time off, that that I hadn't achieved what I wanted to achieve yet, and now looking at it, that was a little silly, but I feel like what Neal said is right, and no one's said that enough, that it's not just a 3-year plan. They make it, at least maybe, hopefully not as much anymore, but they make it seem like you'll go to law school for 3 years and you'll get a great job and you'll be happy for the rest of your life, except that lawyers have like highest rates of depression and alcoholism, but you will be happy and you'll be fulfilled. But that's how it seemed like, and that's not actually true. I mean, the stats are true, but unfortunately. But it seemed your career is much longer and there's so much to learn. I had thought that maybe if I had taken time off, I would have been in a professional setting and, learning the ins and outs of how to work well and what to do. And now looking back on it, I think that going through, I knew I wanted to go to law school. I'm still happy with that decision that I made. Seeing that I went through, yes, there are always going to be growing pains wherever you start. I'm happy that I started in the workforce with the degree that I wanted. So being able to get all my education out of the way and then say, okay, I'm here and now it's time to grow my career, that is helpful to me. And to realize that this is a long-term path, that there's a long way to go. So I've been working for 3 years now, and what Neal said is right. You go through these growing pains that you didn't anticipate because you think you learned how to be a lawyer, but you didn't. And that's a lot of work, and it's surprising how much work that is, but it's nice to be able to have all this, everything I need to be able to do this job and to be in the career I want to be in. The reason I decided not to take time off was because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had an environmental science degree. It's like, okay, I can go work for an environmental consulting company and be like the person who collects samples of soil that then get taken back to the lab. And that didn't seem very appealing to me. So I was like, I'm just going to go all the way through.
Yeah, I'll share a couple of my thoughts. Again, like I said, I get asked this question a lot. I appreciate everything that has been said, and I think if you know what you want to do, go for it. I would caution that if you're not sure that you want to be a lawyer, maybe don't start law school that fall. I think that it's the type of, you let people chuckle, but I have friends that did that.
Yeah.
They weren't sure.
Yeah.
They came to school, and some of them it ended up being good for them, and some of them left. And it's an expensive year to go to law school if you're not going to finish. If you just get through like 1 year, so careful there. I went straight through as well, and it's hard to say. I think, Claire and I specifically, when we graduated, was the height of, the tail of the recession that was really hitting, particularly people that had just come out of school still in 2013 and 14. So there were all kinds of factors that went into my decision. But if you're sure that that's what you want to do, go for it. If you're not, maybe take a step back and do something for a while to see if you can get sure. And there are opportunities to work as a paralegal for a firm or get involved with an organization that has environmental lawyers. I think that Neal's point about having kind of a new zest for school would have been helpful for me. I was kind of, at 22 starting another round of school in the fall, like, okay. But in the end, it was worked out for me, but so those are my thoughts there. I want to, something that came up in this conversation is the idea of you graduate law school without knowing how to be a lawyer, and I think it's actually pretty true. You might know what's required of you ethically, what it takes to represent a client, but you're not probably going to have specific skills to go out and represent a client in a matter right away. The rules for being a lawyer, the professional conduct rules say that anyone is if you're a lawyer, you're qualified to represent a matter if you take the time and learn it and study it. Well, that means different things on any different kinds of legal matters. But I would just put in a plug for, work-based experience in law school. I was able to take a clinic course for 2 full semesters in law school, and that was great. I got to litigate as a student attorney. I haven't litigated since then, but I can still say I did a year of litigation work for NGO clients, clerking for firms while you're in school. On top of those things you might be able to get involved with, like journals or moot court or kind of the more traditional law school extracurriculars, which are all very valuable too, but a special pitch for looking at ways to actually practice while you're in school. I might come back to a couple more of these prepared ones that I've had, but we've got questions coming in from the online, and I'm sure folks in the room have them, but before that I want to open it up to the panel. Any questions for each other? I like to get those out of the way in case there's something pressing on one of our minds that we won't need to know from the other people.
I want to hear from the group.
Okay. Jan, anything for us before we go into questions?
What Neal said.
Great. All right. So Colin's got a microphone in the back. If we have any questions in the house, actually Paula's going to run the mic for us. Thanks, Paula. Go ahead and get your hands up. Start with some in-person questions.
Hello. Okay. First of all, thank you so much for being here. My question is actually specific to Neal. Given that you got another degree after law school, correct? Could you walk us through why you made that decision and if that closed any doors in terms of practicing as an attorney by getting that advanced degree and removing yourself from the environment you were before, and how that opened doors going forward?
Sure, happy to address that. Actually, it was sort of one of these mid-career programs, and so it was a crash course at the Kennedy School called the Senior Managers in Government Program. I had finished my service with the Obama administration and was looking for my next step, so it was a perfect thing to do in between. So I wouldn't say it closed any doors. I'd say it gave me a different perspective, a different appreciation. And going back to the earlier question about sort of the degree that's right for you or the experience that's right for you, I'd say, you know, I was reminded there that there's no right answer. Today, for example, I work, you know, shoulder to shoulder with government affairs and in-house teams at GE, and not all of them are lawyers. You know, some bring business MBA backgrounds, some bring MPA backgrounds, and you know, they're more valuable. And some have no graduate degree and sort of earn their chops on the Hill or otherwise, and they all bring extremely valuable knowledge, expertise, networks, all those things, and they're all doing their jobs, but they come from different backgrounds. So to me, it just reiterates the point that, and obviously you can be the Clean Power Director at a major climate foundation with a non-legal background and be doing that very well too. So it's a question of figuring out what's best for you and your highest and best use, and it's a very personal question.
Hi, thank you everybody for being here. I have a question, just throw it out into the ether, whoever wants to answer it. But you all are doing different things within the environmental field itself. Can anyone answer how easy or how tough is it to transition between different types of practice within the environmental field, whether you want to go from being a litigator to working in policy or maybe in public service? Anyone has any insight on that?
Might be.
Sure, I'll start. Yeah, I'll say this. Not all transitions are equal. I would say if you start in litigation, you can it's easier to make a transition in policy. If you start at a firm, it's easier to make a transition in-house. Frankly, I don't think a single one of you is going to be hired in-house right out of school. I don't think that's going to happen. And at least at most major in-house operations these days, they're looking for people with experience. And so this goes back to my point about do what you can when you can. Right? So the transition question I would tackle this way. It's like, well, when can I clerk? Probably the first year, 2 or 3. That might be a great time to do it. When can I work for a firm? Well, early in my career or late. When can I work in-house? Probably mid-career or later. And just kind of stagger it, try to get your experience in the order that makes most sense. I think the most traditional path is usually, big firm or, firm experience into one of the other spurs. So that transition is kind of easiest and most well-worn. It's a little bit harder to do the other way, but also possible. So, my experience has been not all transitions are equal, and not all transitions are evident. An opportunity may come up because, let's say, somebody you work with at your firm is going into government and they want to take you. And so then all of a sudden there's not really even an application process, right? It's just they're going to take you. Or they may go into a foundation, or they may, vice versa. So a lot of your career will unfold at the combination of skills and sort of opportunity. And then I would map out if it's not too much, if you can see yourself doing this, I would just take a blank sheet of paper and map out what are some of the experiences I want to have in the first 10 years out of grad school, and then think realistically about when you can have those experiences.
I have something.
Yeah.
So when I graduated from law school, I did some contract work for an independent consultant, and then for 1.5 years, I worked for an environmental consulting group, and then I moved to the firm. And that's not a traditional, Neal's correct, it is easier to start out a firm and work your way elsewhere, and I was like, I'm just, I'm doing compliance for environmental consulting group, this is my realm, and I was surprised that my application to a firm was really appealing. I think it's important not to close yourself off, especially when you're starting out and still young. Get the job you can get. Don't reject jobs because it's not in your path. If you can get a job, take it and hold on to it. But then having that compliance experience and talking about, going to a law firm and saying, I've worked closely with clients. I've done auditing at facilities. I've seen them. I've walked them through compliance. I'm in charge of managing state compliance and making sure that all our information is up to date and creating auditing materials, which if you probably don't audit, but that is literally all the environmental requirements made into bullet point form with explanations. It's very detailed and you're in it. You're in those regulations deep. And to have that experience and go to a law firm and say, I have experience working closely with clients and digging into the regulations, they were like, oh, that's great because that's exactly what we do, but in a different level and in a different place. So I think what I did for a while in that job and then going into interviews was I slotted myself away. I said, oh, I don't have big firm experience. Oh, I'm doing consulting. But instead it was like, look at these skills. These are exactly the kind of things that you want, and I am doing them. And if you start out at a big firm, you're not working with clients. You're working with partners who are then working with the clients. If your interactions are small, and you're getting that experience, but they value that client service and how to help people and how to be very detail oriented. So talk about what the skills you have and don't sort yourself away and say, oh, I'm not a big firm person. I don't have that experience. So, because if I was interviewing for this job at a firm against other people who were coming from different big firms, but I stood out because I had unique experience and a passion for what they were doing, and they saw that in me. So don't limit yourself. Leave that up to other people.
Good point. Neal, I think Neal hit both good comments there. I think a couple of things to reiterate from what Neal said. There definitely is that litigation first attitude. I don't know if I understand it, but it's real. And for me, the question is, okay, well, I can go to law school and graduate at 27, not litigate for a while, and go back to it later or whatever. Someone can do that. Or you can graduate law school at 35 and go straight into litigation. But there is that sense. That's true. I wanted to highlight, keeps talking about clerkships, which, if you get a chance to clerk for a Ninth Circuit or any appellate court, take that first. But there are these law clerkships and also some more of the short-term employment opportunities available right after law school, like fellowships. ELI has several fellowships for people for a year after you graduate law school. You're here. And those types of things don't, in my view, seem to put the same. Obviously, clerking for a judge at any level is good experience on litigation, but people can come do a fellowship at ELI, which we're much more of a think tank policy shop type, and get jobs at DOJ or some of the major environmental NGOs that litigate. So those, especially the ones that come with working for law schools that have program fellowships afterwards, those kinds of things also kind of give you some real life experience and shows your next employer that they've got some of that hands-on training that they're going to need to actually be effective in this role. So just to point those out. All right, let's go to a couple from online. Let's see. Claire, this one's directed towards you, so I'm going to give it to you. You don't have to take it if you don't want. Have you ever run into things that you felt uncomfortable with your own kind of environmental ethic in what you've been asked to do working for a firm that represents corporations?
No, no. And a lot of people ask me that. And because, in the environmental field, even in the firms, a lot of people really care about the environment. These issues, you care about them. Everyone, at least in my experience, most people are passionate about environmental protection. And the thing that I think a lot of people lose when they're young and passionate, like we all are in law school and all, and you want to do good, is that the important thing to remember is that no one wants to be out of compliance. No one wants to be the bad guy. And at my job, I work with people who are in charge of the environmental, they want to do their jobs well. That is their job, to keep their company out of trouble. They want to do the right thing, and people can lose that. I grew up in Houston, and when Deepwater Horizon happened, I was actually here interning at the EPA in college, and also, it was a long event, so back home. And I had friends, parents, who were testifying in front of Congress about why the spill happened and the explosion, and it was really terrible. But they were devastated. Those people who were in charge of that, they were absolutely devastated that this happened, that people died, that the spill was so huge, that it was their responsibility. And that's what you have to remember, that these companies aren't, if you look, structurally is one thing, but if you're working with people and you're helping them do their job well, and you're helping keep them out of trouble and keep the environment safe, that's what our job is, and that's what I do every day. No one's like, well, how can we skirt this? They're like, how can we do this? Yes, cheapest, easiest, all those things. That's true, but that's not, no one's trying to get out of doing things. They're trying to keep out of trouble and to keep doing things right and to get a positive job review. Because if you're the person whose facility then had a major violation, you're going into your annual review and they're saying, hey, how'd you miss that? That's bad. You don't want to be that person showing up for your review for that happening.
And, Neal can probably speak, companies that are proactive with their environmental compliance, like GE and others that ELI works with, and, a lot of the big companies in particular are ahead of the curve as far as environmental compliance and what they might even be required to do. So private environmental governance is a thing that I think is a growing area of focus in our profession, and I'd encourage everyone to look into that when you're thinking about how to be the most effective environmental advocate, particularly with the way that our politics are in this country. So, do we have another question in person?
Sure. Thank you so much for everything you guys have shared. It's been incredibly helpful. I am in the undergraduate boat that Brett was talking about, trying to figure out how I want to continue my education after I graduate. And I'm curious, it seems very valuable to learn how to think like a lawyer. But if you can't really picture yourself actually practicing law, do you feel as though it's still valuable to go to law school, or would you recommend pursuing higher education, maybe in a master's in environmental policy or something like that?
Yeah, I can say, for me, the first time in my life I felt smarter was after I graduated from law school. I think most everyone feels pretty smart. And when I graduated, I was like, I learned something. Like, I think better now. And that was really valuable for me to go through that process and learn how to think like a lawyer. I am more analytical. I read deeper. I see issues I didn't see before. And that was the law school experience, for better, for worse. And I'm glad I did that. I've never been in another grad program, so I can't speak to how those graduates feel, but that for me was really helpful to learn those skills and really learn how to think in a different way that enhanced what I already knew how to do, but it made me way better at it.
I'd agree with that, and frankly, it's I'd work backwards. If you don't want to practice, if you don't want to litigate, you don't have to answer this question in front of everyone right now. But what do you want to do? And what do you think you want to do? And by that, for you and for everyone, not just your first job, but look around the corner. What can you see your third job being? And when you look, so maybe it's your first job. You don't want to litigate forever. You don't want to practice forever. But you start and you say, well, let me see how this goes, and whether it's in government or an NGO or elsewhere or at a firm, you start by practicing. But if now being more than 10 years out, I can say, at least the Georgetown law experience, maybe a third of the people I graduated with aren't practicing anymore. They're doing really interesting things that are not practicing, everything from the HR side of law to running their own whiskey distillery. You can do a lot of things. After you don't have to be a lawyer to distill, but it helps. And district distilling, by the way, 14th Avenue, check it out. Class good of mine. In any case, no, I guess I'd say that's a question that we all grappled with. I think even in real time, what am I doing here? I don't want to practice forever. I don't want to be at a firm forever. I don't want to forever. And so I would say the easiest way to answer that is, externally speaking, it's a validator. It's a fantastic validator. It brings you into the rooms, and realistically, as a minority, as women, it's a particularly important validator. I'll just speak personally and candidly. but I don't think it's a necessary one. So I think that question that you're asking, I would spend as much effort as humanly possible answering that for yourself, as much time as it takes, because to Brett's earlier point, it's an expensive decision, it's an impactful decision, and it will change the sort of future arc of your life. Now, you might sit shoulder to shoulder with the folks who took a totally different path 10 years, 15 years down the line, but it is going to be a different path to get back to where you're going. So I would work backwards, basically. I would think about what is that third job that I want if I don't want to practice forever, and could I get it with the Nicholas School degree, or a public policy degree, or something different. And maybe if the answer is yes, do that, because that's less time. And not only is it less time and less money, but it's less of the roundabout, right? If you really want to do environmental policy, then getting an environmental policy degree may be the thing for you to do, instead of doing law and then doing the bank shop with the practice and the clerking and then coming back around to it. It is the way a lot of people tend to do it, but it takes a lot longer. So this is this time that you have now to figure that out is at a premium. And it's good you're asking that question. I think a lot of people don't even ask that question and kind of back into it. Several of my classmates were stellar. Okay, last thing I'll say on this. If you are particularly have the curse of being a stellar student and a stellar test taker, and you can get into good or great law schools, then it's particularly important for you to ask that question, because that means that you probably could do a lot of other things in a stellar fashion too. But a lot of people didn't stop to ask themselves that question and just ended up being fantastic law students and then miserable young lawyers. So just ask yourself that question as many times as it takes.
Jan, I'd like to get your perspective on this issue. We had someone ask specifically about deliberating between law school and a public policy degree, but as a non-attorney working in this field,
yep.
what kinds of degrees do you see people working with? What's kind of your take on this whole idea of, okay, what do I do next?
I think, thank you for asking, and I think it depends on level of ambition. When I look at all of the people who inspire me, Chairwoman Nichols at the Air Resources Board, David Hayes, who recently cycled out of the Department of Interior, a lot of folks who were high-level decision makers in the previous administration, they all have law degrees. So I think if you really want to go for the brass ring at the highest levels of policy making, that policy tends to get decided around the existing body and canon of environmental law, and so I think that's an important degree to have. I think if I'll say that my manager here, the vice president of ClimateWorks, also comes to ClimateWorks with a law degree and a 25-year career practicing in Hong Kong. So it certainly doesn't foreclose opportunities. But that being said, for the kind of day-to-day nuts and bolts, grind through very, very difficult quantitative problems, then a policy background and degree is really wonderful to have. And there are some organizations in DC, where I used to work, that won't even let you stay on if you don't have a PhD in economics. So I think it all depends.
Yeah, those pesky econ PhDs.
25 years later, and I still am feeling sour grapes, but they did me a favor.
But on that point, I would say there are probably too many lawyers in DC and not enough people with true science jobs that can inform this conversation on environmental policy. So if you're at all technically minded, I think that's another great direction to go.
Or the patent bar. Okay, let's see. Do we have any more in the room? Yeah, great.
Thank you guys for being here again. But I guess kind of going off of that, my background is kind of more in the technical science side and kind of interested in pursuing a future in environmental policy. And if any of you could possibly speak to your experiences with working possibly with people who have more scientific technical backgrounds as opposed to straight policy or environmental law background, that'd be really helpful.
Sure.
Thanks.
Well, I'd say when I was at the White House, we had AAAS fellows. I don't know if you've heard of that fellowship, but they are tremendous. They're tremendous for the fact that they bring the scientific, technical mindset and expertise, but also that they can understand and speak policy and really translate really, really dense subject matter into, policy speak that, lawyers and others can understand. So again, I'll just reiterate, I find it immensely valuable. I have worked with quite a few people with scientific and technical backgrounds, masters, PhDs, and they are frankly more, pound for pound, more valuable to the conversation, so long as they can also do one other critical skill, which I don't know, Jan can speak to whether it's a part of the sort of basic PhD training, but communications. That is a lot of the blocking and tackling of a law degree, is how to think, how to articulate yourself, how to tell them what you're going to say, how to say it, how to tell them what you just said. That's part of the law degree. So if you feel that you can also accumulate the skills to be a good communicator, having that scientific technical background and coming back here through a AAAS fellowship or otherwise is just a great way to go, in my view.
Others in the room? All right, we still have some time. Let's turn back to the webinar. This one's interesting, and I'll go to Jan first and Neal, probably the two that have done this. Well, Claire, you can speak on this too, I guess. As a new attorney who is interested in getting a broad career base, this is the questioner asking, and wanting to avoid getting pigeonholed, how long would you recommend staying at your first job before leaving? In law school, the focus is on getting your first job. There's not a lot of guidance on your second and third. So I think the question is, what's valuable to have, what is still showing that you're committed to, you're a good employee. Thoughts on these kind of early career moves. Jan?
I'm probably the worst person to ask, because if you go to my LinkedIn page, I look like a job jumper, even though I'm not. And I think part of the reason for that is that, this is a very dynamic environment. So as I, initially alluded to, I started my career in toxics. It very, very quickly evolved into voluntary environmental agreements, and then it morphed into climate, where, that's also a very dynamic field, in the sense that where the locus of action tends to be, I don't have to tell any of you this, it's probably not in DC right now. It's probably in the states. It's in companies. It's in cities. And so and sitting out here in Silicon Valley, where people move from job to job, year to year, month to month, and that's actually viewed as a good thing, because that tacit knowledge that you build up in those companies transfers around. I think that the standards are super different. And Neal alluded to this earlier. I mean, when I was coming into the field, one sort of went into the workforce and expected to stay there throughout one's career. And I have colleagues in state government and at EPA who have done that very, very effectively. But that being said, I don't really think that there's any particular time. It's more, what skill set do you bring, and how able are you to work in a rapidly changing environment?
Thanks. Any other thoughts on that? Claire, you obviously made quick moves. Was that ever a concern of anyone's?
No. When I went into interviews, no one was particularly concerned about it, because I articulated why I had grown out of the job I was in and why I was looking for this new opportunity, and I could see how this job they were advertising was what I was looking for. It was very clear to me in my last job that I outgrew it very quickly, and I was bored. I needed more. I couldn't have stayed there much longer. So if you're not bored, maybe the calculus changes, but for me, I was like, I'm done. I need more. I need to move on. And going into a job interview and saying that to someone, they hear you and they respect that. No one was like, oh, this looks sketchy. They were like, oh, wow, I understand what you're saying. And they wanted to know why I was interested in that job. But to be able to explain yourself, why you're looking, why you're done, and not in a way that's like, I'm so bored at my previous job, but, to say, I feel like I've gained all I have and I'm ready to move on. That's when I knew I was ready to move on. And I never got any negative pushback in any way from that.
Particularly if you have a reference at your current or former employer who's willing to say,
yeah,
they did a great job for us. We are sad that they're moving on, but, I think
yeah. So I have a friend in Silicon Valley who actually I talked to, and he said, if you're looking for a job, and I was talking that I was looking for a job, he said, talk to your boss about it, because your boss should be someone who, if you have a somewhat good relationship with your boss, should care about you personally and your development, and they can help you, fix the job you're in now and help you in your job search. And I did, and I thought that I had never considered saying to my employer, hey, I'm looking, and I didn't go into HR and say, hey, I'm looking. My boss was a really kind, and she invested in her underlings, and she was great, and I said, this is what's going on. She said, I hear you, I understand. And, she helped me kind of patch more things together in my job at that time to make it better for me. But when I was gone, she was happy, and she, encouraged me to go. And she was a great reference.
Great. Others in the room, yeah.
Hi. I'm just wondering, when looking at law schools, to what extent do you think it's a high priority to try to go to a place that has a really good reputation, particularly in environmental law? Is that like a big determinant in your opinion, or does that not make a huge difference?
It's a good question. One I grappled with, 15, however many years ago. I would say, so I was trying to decide between Vermont, which was, environmental law, heaven, and Georgetown, which was like a top 10 program, but, an overall better known school. I had decided, it ended up coming down to me. I had spent my college years in New England, so I wanted to come down here and check out the DC thing and do something different. And so I chose that way. I guess I'd say, I'd answer it this way. If you go to a school that's primarily known for environmental law, you better be pretty sure you want to be in environmental law. This goes back to my earlier point about, starting your career broadly. That's a great way to do it. And, I had a fellow working with me last year. She was a recent graduate of Vermont Law, and she was absolutely stellar. I'm sure she's going to have a fantastic career after she's done a GE. But what I'd say is if you think you want to go into environmental law, but you want to experience kind of a broader suite of things, look to the more general rankings, but also make sure that they have somebody that you could chase. This gets back to what I always did, I'm sure what others did, instead of chasing subject matter, in law school or college or whatever, chase good professors. And that to me would be my answer to the earlier question too. If you have a mentor at your workplace, at your grad school, college that well enough to be a mentor, keep them, get deep in your relationship with them, and stay in touch with them over the years, right? And when you get to law school, stay in touch with your college mentors. When you get to work, stay in touch with both of them, all of them, and continue to deepen the relationship over the years. You'll be surprised how much they will help you answer that question in real time. I mean, this panel's going to be over by the time you're answering that question, but your mentors will be there with you when you're like, here's what I'm thinking about. What do you think? What are the pros and cons in real time? And they'll be there. So keep those guys and gals and then keep them close and deepen those mentor relationships, because they'll be the ones that help you answer that question when it comes to it.
I think I can add a little bit, because I made a decision to go to Tulane, which is has a strong environmental focus. They're also, do a lot of things there. It's not quite so much environmental focus as Vermont or Lewis and Clark or somewhere like that. But it was really that the work that they were doing there, the specific wetlands work that I was interested in, and specific professors like Neal was saying, that I appreciated their work. I wanted to be there. But it is a tough question, and I get this a lot as well from folks considering, okay, say you got into a T14 school, but I really want to do environmental stuff. It's a tough question. I think if you've got Harvard and Yale offering you a full ride, that's pretty hard to turn down, kind of thing. But I don't know, any other thoughts? I think it's a balance between, what, and all those other factors that go into it too, like where you are, where you're going to be happy. Because don't forget to take care of yourself while you're in law school. So I'll put that plug in there too. Have fun and be healthy, and because it's just as intense when you leave. Let's say that.
I know quite a few people who went to environmental specific law schools, and what I've seen in their, as their careers are going to those schools are great if you're at the top of your class. They're still good if you're not, but people who are not at the top of those environmental specific schools, they struggle more. So if you feel like that's a place you can go and really stand out, and if you get a good scholarship, it's hard to say no to avoiding a lot of debt. But that I've seen, you will eventually get where you need to go. I think most people attain what their skill is, no matter what their credentials are, in one way or another, and it might take more time. But the people who have been most successful coming out of those schools tend to be at the top of their class, really the stars of that school. And, it gets harder the farther down you go in the class rankings.
Yeah, if you're not aware of this, unfortunately, well, for better or worse, ranking in your own law school class and among the law schools has an impact in this field. It's pretty interesting, and do consider those things as you're making decisions in this. One or two more in the room, and then anything else? Okay, a couple fun ones. These are for the whole group. We'll go one at a time through these, starting with Jan. The first question is, what was our aha moments? When did we know that we wanted to do what we're doing?
This is going to sound really hokey, but I knew when I was 5 that I just wanted to dedicate my life to being in service to the people and their animals and plants that were unable to defend themselves. And while I didn't take a path in the law, and sometimes I regret that, I still feel as though I'm still working in service toward those goals. But being able to achieve them just takes a little more patience than I had originally anticipated, and please don't let that discourage you.
What happened? What was going on at 5? Was it?
I don't know. It was like a bolt. I was actually on a swing set looking at the moon, and it just hit me.
Wow. It's poetic. How about you, Neal?
I was a little bit older than that. I was a senior in college, and I spent the year working with the Attorney General of Rhode Island as an extern, working on something that seemed simple at the time. There was a million scrap tires in a big old pile in Smithfield, Rhode Island, just about 10 minutes outside of Providence. And, the Attorney General is a guy who's actually made his way to town now. His name's Sheldon Whitehouse. He's now a U.S. Senator. He used to be the Attorney General at the time. And, over the course of that year, meager as my contribution was, what I saw was the power of the law to, we ended up removing and remediating that whole 1 million scrap tire pile over the course of the year. And I saw the power of paper, like with the right words behind it and the right force and the right force of law behind it to move big things. Later in my career when I was clerking, we had a case about the naval use of sonar off the coast of Southern California, the Winter BNRDC case that I got to work on. And at the time, the Supreme Court later overturned it, but our opinion was that the entire U.S. Navy Joint Strike Force fleet should stop what it was doing because it was a violation of the MMPA and the CZMA. And they did until their appeal was won. I mean, you can imagine what that's like when you go to China and say, hey, in our country, a piece of paper can stop the U.S. Navy from its exercises if a U.S. court says it's a violation of federal environmental law. So I've been wowed over and over again. So I say it's an exciting field by the power of words in the right order on a piece of paper to move mountains.
Well, maybe don't tell China that. With all China. But no, thanks. That's great.
For me, so I majored in environmental science in college, and I knew that I wanted to go into the environmental law and policy field. And while I was in college, I interned at the EPA in the Office of Air and Radiation, and there was one meeting, well, there were several meetings about one issue where they had a lot of different people from different roles, so public health people, science, PhD people with very technical backgrounds, and the lawyers in the office. And that meeting turned out to be very instructive in how these different roles play together. And everyone had good points. I knew that's the conversation I wanted to be in when I entered it, but to figure out what role I wanted to be in. And what I liked in that conversation, or, what I saw between them, was the lawyer kept pulling it back and saying, okay, this is what we have. This is what the law says this is what we can do. Now let's move on from there. And that spoke to me. I want to do big things, but you have to stay in the realm of what you can do. And having the lawyer in that room being focused and saying, this is, yes, you're right. You're completely right, but this is our scope. Let's focus on that. And that issue, you can change laws later, but when you have and it was a compliance issue, you have to focus on what you can do in that moment. And I liked that kind of direction that the law brought to the conversation that I already knew I wanted to be in.
Thanks. I guess I'm somewhere between Jan and Neal and Claire. I'd say my childhood, I was more of the hook and bullet kind of conservationist. I love outdoors. I fish a lot. I knew I wanted to work in that realm. I maybe saw myself as some sort of land manager or working for DOI or something more along those lines. And I'd say it was probably in my high school and probably college years. I think law school was on my radar, but I really learned about the nutrient pollution issues in the Midwest where I'm from, and how, farming, these, farmers who are intimately connected to the environment and to the land were part of this system that really caused some environmental degradation downstream in the rivers, and particularly all the way down in the Gulf of Mexico with the hypoxic zone. It was kind of that kind of big environmental issue that made me realize, this isn't going to get solved through advocacy work necessarily, going door to door and talking. It's going to take some carrots and a stick too to get some of this work done. And that's where I realized that the role for me was going to be a lawyer and help facilitate those conversations. That's one thing I really enjoy about being a lawyer, is being that person in the room and being able to help people solve problems. That's really what lawyers are doing. Is there's a conflict and we're there to resolve it. Generally, there's a particular side that you're advocating for, but ultimately the resolution is what everyone's there for. And I kind of saw that as the role I could play in environmental policy. So thanks everyone for that. We'll wrap up with a fun one. Hopefully it's fun. Back to Jan. Let's give everyone here our best interviewing tip.
you hear my I'm afraid I don't have a very good interviewing tip, because I find that this is really back to Neal's point about finding your mentor and sticking with them. When I've managed to find jobs, I haven't had to interview for them, because typically it's someone with whom I've been in touch with, or a former professor calling me up and saying, and that's exactly how it worked with Chairwoman Nichols. She picked up the phone and called me and said, move, and I did. So I find that when I do go out on the job market and interview cold somewhere where I don't have any connections inside, that, I don't know, one can come in as completely prepared for that position as one might hope, but 9 times out of 10, I find that when one goes in for that type of a situation, there's always an inside candidate, and the job is wired for someone else. So not to be discouraging, but short of that, yeah, I would just say find mentors. I'll say that my RA here at ClimateWorks is someone that I started mentoring back when, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and we have worked together throughout since that period. So seriously, find a mentor and have lots of mentees.
Neal.
Oh, I'll say check your teeth in the mirror right before you're in. And after you're done with that, ask questions. If you are done with your answers portion of the interview and they ask you, what questions do you have for me? And your answer is, I think you got them all, you're on the wrong path. I promise you. Ask questions about how the person got, how did they find their passion? How did they get to where they are? Because you may get the role, you may not get the role. But in any case, you're going to leave that interview learning something about a person, forming a relationship, learning something about that enterprise that might help you with your next interview that's 7 minutes away in the next room, and certainly it's something that no matter what happens with the actual job, you'll learn. So make sure you always have a question when it comes time to that.
My best tip is to just really dig. So just dig in deep. Yes, mentors can help you, but you can also go into a job interview cold and make a connection with another human. And that's what they want, is for you to connect. So just really dig into whatever the job description says, but then go on an internet spiral into that company. Everyone's like, do your research. It's hard to know what research is right, really, until you get in the interview. But if you've looked at as much as you can look at, as they start saying things, it'll start making sense to what you looked at. So just keep digging. You might think you're looking at nothing. You might be looking at blog posts that someone wrote 5 years ago, but then they bring up that topic and you know about it and it's really helpful. And if you can get a person's information who's interviewing before, do that same thing with them. The internet has a whole lot of stuff out there for you to find. Also, don't be afraid to cold call people at organizations where you're interviewing. So if you if you're interviewing for something and you see someone went to your undergrad, call them up. If someone called me today and was like, hey, I'm interviewing at Perkins Coie and I went to A&M, and they were interviewing for the office in Boise, I would still be thrilled and I would do everything I could to help them. So don't be afraid to reach out. The most minuscule connection that you have, and even if someone was like, I'm applying for this, and they didn't have connection, I'd still help them and at least talk to them and see, what they needed. Just so I was always afraid to do that when I was interviewing for places, but now on the other side, if people do it, I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for thinking of me. I'm happy to help you in any way I can. And don't be afraid to do that. So just keep digging and keep getting as much information as you can. So then when you're in the interview, you're not surprised. You already have a frame of reference, and maybe you don't know the specific thing, but you'd be surprised how much you can find, even if you don't think it's important and you don't think it'll come up. It might, and then you know. Oh, and one more. Have you power posing? It's a thing, and if you haven't seen the TED Talk, you should look it up. But I was very surprised that once I started power posing before interviews, it actually worked. I got more callbacks. I got more job offers. I'm not joking. Some people have criticized it recently, but if it at least works on you, I think her name's Amy Cuddy. Power posing, look it up, give it a try. You'll feel weird, but then it'll feel less weird in the interview.
I guess I would add the connections at the place where you're interviewing it. That's great, and you can make them before you apply or once you get the interview. Maybe you get offered an interview and then you're like, okay, now I need to really focus on this. If you're just graduating law school, chances are you've got 50, 100 applications out at once. But when you get the interview, it's time to focus on that place. Hopefully you have 50, 100 interviews ready to go. But ask around with your contacts. Hey, has anyone interviewed here? Do I know anyone here? And make that connection if at all possible, which has already been mentioned. But at the same time, I would encourage you not to shy away from the cold applications. You never know what's going to stand out to someone on your application, on your resume, or in your cover letters. Which also means put time into those cover letters. Write them specifically for the place that you're interviewing, for the person who you're interviewing with, if you know. It forces you to do that research that Claire's talking about and really understand, like, okay, why do I want this job? Have answers to those basic questions. And I guess more on the tip side, one of my things that I've seen work well is the interviewee asking the interviewer if there's any concerns that they have about the candidate. Ask them right there at the end of your interview. Is there anything that I'm doing or any concerns you have about my application? Gives you a chance to clear it up right there if it's something simple, or maybe that there's a way to reframe it for the next one. But that's a way to really show that you're serious about the job and you want to take their concerns into consideration. I hate to end with my own voice, but we've come to the end of our time for today. I want to thank our panel. Thanks so much, Jan, for joining us on your morning in San Francisco. Thanks, Neal and Claire. And if everyone in the room could join me in thanking our panel. Special shout out to those of you on the webinar, especially those who sent in questions. We look forward to continuing the summer school series. For those of you who may not know, starting next week, we dive into environmental law topic by topic. So land use and NEPA and ESA, water, air, toxics all come up in their own sessions. You can take a look on the ELI events calendar. It'd be great to see everyone back here next week. And thanks all for joining us, and enjoy your summers in DC. Thanks again, and be sure to sign up for that ELI membership that all the students in the audience have for free. With that, I'll close it up. Thanks again.